Some believe that Intrepid has not had a clear vision regarding combat and that they have pivoted over time on what their vision is for combat. I'm first going to list the major arguments I have seen that attempt to support this idea. Do know that I don't agree with these arguments, and I will give evidence why I don't. First, here are the arguments we will be looking at. Number one, Ashes started as a tab target game, and that is the type of combat that was sold to Kickstarter backers. Number two, Ashes then pivoted to the hybrid combat system that they talk about now. And number three, now Ashes is pivoting to more action than tab. There are some other arguments I have seen as well, but honestly I don't think they even merit talking about. First, I want to start with the idea that Ashes started as a tab game, and that was the type of combat proposed during the Kickstarter. So naturally the first place to look is the Kickstarter page. If you do a search for combat on that page, you get no results. Combat is not talked about on the Kickstarter page at all. So a lot of Kickstarter backers were probably not aware of what type of combat they were going for. But if you get into the Discord and search the word combat in Steven's messages, most of the early combat references were pretty vague. But the first mention of hybrid was in January 2017. Again, he referenced hybrid when mentioning combat in April of 2017. The Kickstarter for Ashes started May of 2017. So while probably not many people knew much about the combat vision for Ashes at the time, it was never mentioned as tab only before, during, or after the Kickstarter. Now, very little was known about what they meant by hybrid combat early on, as they didn't get into any details early on. But it was clear from a very early stage that the game was not going the route of tab only combat. So that pretty easily eliminates argument number one and number two. What about argument number three, the idea that Ashes is now pivoting to more action than tab? Well, one thing I will say is that hybrid action and tab combat is a broad term that is not very specific. The first deeper explanation I could find was from Jeffrey Bard on the live stream in April 2018, where he first explained that a player can choose to have 75% of skills slotted that are either action or tab. This clarified much more the approach and direction for combat. Since then, they have stuck to that, and I can't find any shift in that approach since then. Some are looking at the recent live stream as evidence that they are shifting to more action than tab. But the truth is, the skill they showed is your spammable basic weapon attack skill, and only the melee version of that skill. This worked exactly the same way it worked in Alpha 1. You pressed Q to activate this skill. You could hold it down if you wanted to constantly cast it. And in melee, no matter if you were in action or tab camera mode, it worked like an action skill, meaning it had animation collision detection, and you had to be in range of whatever you were attacking for it to register damage. In the June livestream, it was not easy to see because they had the UI turned off, but they spent time in both the tab target camera and the action camera. And in both modes, the melee spammable skill worked identical, which has been the clear design vision for a long time, and easily fits into the idea that a player can slot 75% of their skills as action or tab. Again, what they showed in June is very little of the combat, so to look at that small presentation as representative of the total combat system is not fair. And Intrepid recently clarified in both Discord and on the forums that they're still pursuing the hybrid combat system. They have said many times in the past that if the hybrid approach they are going for cannot be pulled off after testing, they will fall back to tab target with action components. Anytime you're presented with an opinion, instead of just blindly agreeing with that opinion, you should do your own research and come to your own conclusions, if at all possible. Some have the opinion that Intrepid has pivoted on combat over time. I have presented evidence here that they haven't, but you should do your own research and come to your own conclusions. That being said, I think focusing on things that are not reality is not the best place to focus. My focus regarding combat is that while I don't see any design pivots, I do see issues with the original design idea. I think pulling off some players being 75% tab, some being 75% action, and a bunch of players being somewhere in between is going to be very hard to pull off, especially with the tall versus wide talent tree choices, which allow some players to have a lot of skills with little buffs to these skills, and others to have fewer skills that are highly buffed. And on top of that, the tons of different augments that come from your secondary profession and a multitude of other sources. This complexity and massive variability from player to player could be a huge challenge to balance. The response has been that balance is rock, paper, scissors, and at the 8-man group level. To be fair, that approach does make balance easier potentially, but will it be enough to offset the complexity built into the core of the combat system? It remains to be seen. That's all I have for this video. This Friday the 29th we have the live stream, and then later at 7 p.m. Eastern Time it will be on the Golden Feather podcast on Twitch. The link will be in the description. Consider subscribing if you haven't. With that, I will see you in the next video.